It's the 30th of September 1999, and in Japan, about 100 kilometers northeast of Tokyo, a man is rushed to hospital. Hisashi Ouchi, a technician at a local nuclear power plant, has just been exposed to the highest dose of radiation ever recorded in a human being. It's almost the same dosage as if the Hiroshima nuclear bomb had dropped directly on top of him. Yet, strangely enough, he seems fine. Other than some redness in his eyes and minor pains, he can walk, he can talk, and his doctors, though surprised, are saying that they can treat him. But things are about to take a dark turn. At this point, nobody can tell that this young, innocent man who's just survived one of Japan's worst nuclear incidents to date is in reality already dead. Over the next 83 days, Ouchi will transform into something straight out of a nightmare. He'll be crying blood as the skin melts from his body, as fluids bubble up and burst through his flesh, and as his DNA crumbles into nothing, all while doctors revive him over and over again. And it will all be because his superiors cared more about their deadlines than his safety. Tragically though, Ouchi's fate was inevitable. Sooner or later, this awful suffering was bound to fall on someone. See, Japan doesn't have many natural resources, so it's always looked for other ways to generate power. For much of the 20th century, the nation needed to import energy. But in the 1950s, after the post-war ban on atomic research was lifted, Japan finally had an answer to its energy resource problem: nuclear power. With plenty of land available and within spitting distance of Tokyo, the town of Tokai was the perfect spot for nuclear development. Companies and government agencies soon rushed in, setting up nuclear research labs, manufacturing plants and fuel management facilities. Before long, nearly a third of the town's population worked in the nuclear industry, and at one point, nuclear energy was providing nearly 30% of Japan's electricity. Unfortunately though, Tokai would soon be the site of not just one, but two nuclear disasters in the space of just a couple of years. On March 11th, 1997, a local nuclear waste facility decided to try something new and cut down the asphalt in its waste mix by 20%. Thanks to its chemical properties, asphalt is used to help lock in the radioactive materials and keep things stable. So, this experiment was already taking a massive risk, and it did not pay off. At around 10 AM, the nuclear waste erupted into a radioactive fire. After seeing that their water sprinklers were useless against the flames, workers on the scene sounded the evacuation alarm and told the engineers who had devised the experiment in the first place that their plan had gone horribly wrong. But the engineers didn't care. They never came to inspect the damage, never checked on the workers, and never even reported the fire to the authorities. Instead, at 8 PM that evening, employees returned to work thinking that it was all over. But just as they were about to enter the building, flammable gases that had been building up all day suddenly ignited into a violent explosion, with radioactive fire bursting through doors and windows. Nearly 40 people were exposed to the radiation, but by sheer luck, no one was seriously hurt. Lessons, however, were not learned. The disaster could have been avoided if plant officials had called emergency services right away. Worse still, investigators later discovered that when these officials were finally forced to report the incident, they lied. Radiation levels around the plant were 10 times higher than what they were saying. Clearly, a trend was emerging. Nuclear facilities were experimenting without oversight, supervision, or training, and in a bid to cut costs, they were becoming reckless. It was this same behavior that 2 years later would lead to the horrific death of Hisashi Ouchi. It all starts at 10:30 AM on September the 30th, 1999 at the Tokaimura nuclear fuel enrichment plant. Technicians 35-year-old Hisashi Ouchi, 29-year-old Masato Shinohara, and their supervisor, 54-year-old Yutaka Yokokawa, are getting ready to purify a new batch of nuclear fuel for an experimental nuclear reactor. Their superiors are behind on deadlines and they're desperately trying to ramp up production. As a result, today is different. The men are ordered to mix uranium, not at the usual 5%, but at nearly 20% enrichment. Worse, The men must take a dangerous shortcut. Their usual process is to mix the uranium with nitric acid in a buffer tank, and then use an automatic pump to move it to a precipitation tank. But their superiors don't have time for that today. Instead, the men must mix the uranium in steel buckets. Then they need to pour it straight into the final tank by hand, and somehow they must still get the measurements exactly right. If that doesn't sound crazy enough, this process hasn't even been approved by the authorities. It's a total gamble, and the men, of course, have not been trained for it. But the clock is ticking after all. Just like the disaster in 1997, these 3 men are being used for a cost-cutting experiment created by their bosses, who, funnily enough, are always at a safe distance far away. These men have no idea yet, but in 5 minutes, this shortcut will cause 2 of their fellow colleagues to suffer slow, painful deaths. They begin. Shinohara holds the bucket ready with the uranium inside, Ouchi stands over the tank with a funnel, and Yokokawa watches from a nearby room. Shinohara pours the uranium through the funnel and into the tank. They keep their hands steady. For everything to go smoothly, they need to pour exactly 2.4 kilograms of the uranium mixture into the tank. But they're using a bucket. How can they know? It was never going to work. At 10:35 a.m., Ouchi and Shinohara seal their fate. They end up pouring not 2.4 kilograms, but 16 kilograms of the uranium mixture into the final tank. Suddenly, the 2 men see a bright blue flash come from inside the tank. In the other room, Yokokawa sees the same light reflected across the walls. Then, they all hear a loud smacking noise. There's no explosion, but down in the bottom of the tank, the mixture poured from the bucket has already reached a critical mass. Ouchi and Shinohara have become some of the only people to ever see a nuclear reaction up close, with no protection. Gamma alarms blare out, and all 3 men run for their lives towards the contamination room as silent, invisible radiation tears through them. They manage to escape the control room, but then Ouchi collapses and starts vomiting and convulsing on the floor. Shinohara is vomiting too. Yokokawa frantically telephones for help, while other workers at the plant rush in to drag the man out. Ouchi is rushed to the local Mito hospital. Inside the ambulance, he's still vomiting, and now he's starting to suffer from uncontrollable diarrhea. By the time he reaches the hospital, though, he's looking better. In fact, when doctors see him, they're amazed. In theory, the amount of radiation he's been exposed to should have instantly killed him. But Ouchi has barely any visible injuries. He's even in good spirits. By all accounts, it's a miracle, and as a result, his doctors are feeling optimistic. This is a family man, after all, a husband and a father, as well as a strong, athletic ex-high school rugby player. He has every reason to survive, and a healthy body to help him do it. Sadly, things go south very quickly. Testing Ouchi's blood, doctors find that his white blood cells have been completely destroyed by the radiation. His entire immune system has vanished, and now he can't fight off even the smallest of infections. What's more, taking images of his bone marrow cells, doctors find that Ouchi's chromosomes have been shattered into pieces. This means his body can't make new cells. Any new cells. This doesn't just include white blood cells, but red blood cells too, which carry oxygen around the body, or even skin cells. Ouchi cannot heal and cannot grow new skin. It means that the radiation has corrupted Ouchi's DNA, and now his body is starting to melt from the inside. Ouchi is transferred to the more specialist University of Tokyo hospital, and doctors take a marrow transfusion from his sister to try and save his life. With the help of her stem cells, Ouchi's body could potentially rebuild his immune system. At first, it seems like things are working. Doctors try multiple stem cell transplants and skin grafts, and some of Ouchi's skin cells are growing back. Perhaps, if doctors can keep him alive, Ouchi's body will eventually regenerate. But then the doctors find something that crushes that hope completely, and it's something that nobody saw coming. Ouchi's sister has also been affected by the radiation, and her chromosomes are damaged too. The reality sinks in. Her transfusions aren't strong enough to save her brother. Doctors desperately call in experts from around the world to help, but Ouchi's body is rapidly falling apart. This becomes painfully clear on one day when a doctor removes some medical tape from Ouchi's chest, and to their horror, they find that his skin starts peeling off with it. He's vomiting again, he's constantly thirsty, and he's producing 10 litres of diarrhea a day. Plus, his abdomen is swelling up and he's struggling to breathe, so doctors put him on oxygen. This turns out to be excruciating for Ouchi. At one point, he tears off his oxygen mask and shouts, "I'm not a guinea pig." But a doctor reminds him of his family waiting outside, so he decides to endure the pain for their sake. In the days and weeks to come, Ouchi stops digesting food as his gut shuts down. His skin is melting away like butter, and blisters are growing all over his body, exposing his flesh as a red, bloody mess. He's being fed intravenously, and the doctors are constantly treating him against the risk of infection. Now Ouchi is in unimaginable pain. Bodily fluids start to collect in his chest and stomach, and with no skin to protect him, these fluids start oozing through his flesh and out onto the bed. Ouchi's muscles are turning to liquid too, and then his eyelids fall off, leaving his eyes constantly dry and painful. To his doctors, it looks like he's crying blood. By now, they're also giving him up to 10 blood transfusions a day. There's even mold growing across his body. Ouchi is essentially rotting alive. He begs his doctors to stop treating him, but neither they nor his family have given up on helping him yet. Instead, to ease Ouchi's suffering, they bring a stereo to his bedside, playing music and nature sounds. Meanwhile, in the hospital waiting area, Ouchi's family set up camp. With little else to do other than worry, they focus on one task: folding origami cranes. In Japanese mythology, cranes are a symbol of long life, and Ouchi's family cling to that hope. As they wait in the hospital, they fold 10,000 paper cranes, praying it will somehow help Ouchi to pull through. But no matter how many cranes they fold, Ouchi only gets worse. He soon stops breathing properly, and doctors are forced to switch out his oxygen mask to a breathing tube. Just before they do this, on October the 10th, Ouchi speaks to his wife for the last time. They squeeze each other's hands and say their goodbyes. And from here on out, doctors can only use hand gestures to talk with Ouchi. From now on, this man is trapped in a state of constant torture with barely any way to communicate with the outside world. All his doctors can do is hook him up to more and more machines, dress him with bandages, and try their best to keep him alive, even as his organs shut down one by one. One day, it seems as if the end has come. After around 2 months of endless suffering, Ouchi's heart stops. But his family are distraught. They can't let him go, not yet, not like this. They beg doctors to keep trying. And so they do. They restart Ouchi's heart and bring him back to life, if you can call it that. He may as well have been dragged back to hell, and this won't be the only time they revive him. Doctors are talking to each other in the hallways at this point. They're starting to wonder if their efforts to save Ouchi are ethical, let alone even possible. He's shown some slight signs of recovery after all, but let's not forget, he's in constant pain. Others, the more Machiavellian doctors, see an advantage in studying Ouchi's suffering for the future of radiation treatment. But things are getting out of hand. On November 27th, Ouchi suffers 3 heart attacks in the space of an hour. Each time his doctors manage to revive him, but he's no longer reacting to the outside world. He's in a vegetative state. What they find next is the nail in the coffin. Looking at images of Ouchi's cells, they find that they're not just dying anymore, but they're actually trying to kill each other. It's the result of a new autoimmune condition that Ouchi has developed, and it makes things crystal clear. He's a dead man. There's nothing more doctors can do for him other than prolong his suffering. After all, no medicine, operation, or transfusion can grow back cells that don't want to live in your body anymore. On December the 19th, Ouchi's doctors decide to give his family the full picture. He's only being kept alive by machines, they say. When his heart gives out next time, they should let him go. His wife agrees. On December the 20th, Ouchi's family are allowed to come beside the hospital bed and say their goodbyes. Even though they get no response, they beg him to survive until the year 2000. But at 11:21 p.m. on December the 21st, Ouchi's body finally gives up. After 83 days of constant pain and suffering, Ouchi is free. The next morning, what's left of him is scraped off of the bed to be buried, and his wife thanks the doctors for everything they've done to try and save the man. During the autopsy, doctors uncover the true extent of Ouchi's suffering. His body has completely rotted and fallen apart. It's swollen, it's broken, and there's barely any skin left. But they do find something surprising. Tucked away behind the remains of Ouchi's body, his heart is completely intact. Despite some strain, it's been unaffected by the radiation that consumed Ouchi everywhere else. Doctors can't explain why, but the more superstitious observers have an answer. See, everyone said that Ouchi was a lovely man. Even though he had stared into the face of a critical nuclear reaction, all thanks to the sheer indifference of his superiors, and was growing sicker, Ouchi's doctors and nurses said he was kind. He was chatty too in the beginning, talking about how he loved to go fishing, spend time outdoors, and be with his family. His lust for life was always there, and it could be the reason why he lasted for so long. He was in high spirits for the most part, and he was grateful for his doctors, that they were trying their very best to save him. Ouchi was never alone either. His family, including his wife, son, parents, sister, and a brother-in-law, visited him every day. And if you go to the University of Tokyo Hospital today, you can still see the 10,000 paper cranes they folded hanging in the waiting area. Ouchi's colleague, Shinohara, also died in April 2000 from organ failure after a 7-month battle in the hospital. The supervisor of the two men, Yokokawa, however, only had minor radiation sickness and survived. Doctors were well aware of how radiation affects the body in 1999, but they'd never seen a patient who'd absorbed so much of it and lived to tell the tale. Hisashi Ouchi had been exposed to the same level of radiation as if he'd been standing in the epicenter of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bombings. One American bone marrow specialist said that Ouchi was the worst victim he'd ever seen. It was an unprecedented moment in medical history, and it raised many difficult questions for doctors about the ethics of treating patients in extreme pain. How long is too long on the hospital bed? Beyond Ouchi, the incident affected many people. It contaminated over 600 local residents in Tokai, while complaints about the accident topped nearly 5,000. These mostly came from people worried about radiation poisoning. Even though Tokai was eventually declared safe, the town's mayor said that it was economically and psychologically scarred by the incident. The local people even wanted to change the town's name to move past the trauma. In the end, 6 officials from the firm responsible for the incident, the Japan Nuclear Fuel Conversion Company, were arrested, facing between 2 and 3 years in prison. They were charged with professional negligence and breaking nuclear safety laws. The company also paid 13 billion yen in compensation and eventually lost its nuclear license. In 2005, the Tokai Morai plant was torn down. But this was not just a problem with one plant. Later investigations exposed the true problem. Weak regulations, broken safety culture, and poor training was prevalent across many nuclear facilities. One survey found that more than 40 local governments in Japan with nuclear facilities did not have manuals for treating people suffering from radiation poisoning. Japan was left with little choice but to increase its reliance on overseas nuclear fuel processing. It also revised its nuclear regulations, adding more safety checks, better emergency plans, and training for workers. But just over a decade later, the Fukushima disaster would derail all of this and once again expose the shortcomings of Japan's nuclear program. In the end, Ouchi's tragic story was just one more chapter in a long history of safety failures in Japan's nuclear industry. And though it led to some reforms, the bigger lesson was perhaps learned by doctors. Just because you can keep someone alive, does that mean that you should?
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout,